You should be able to see that screen. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Yes.
Okay, so not your grandparents' weed. This is me, Jim Schreiner. I'm the Drug Free Communities Grant Project Coordinator through the Pledge for Life Partnership and the ICANN Regional Office of Education. So thought it was a good idea because those of you guys that know me, I tend to go out on the limb on an edge. So I put in a disclaimer for both the regional office and the Pledge for Life Partnership. I can hear Brenda taking a deep sigh of relief there. Okay, so there's that. So I just want to let you know one of the things I really the one of the challenges of being in substance misuse prevention work is the ability for preventionists to put out information that doesn't have sort of a teaching type practice in regards to drug information. So it's really hard. It's a challenge for me being a teacher for so many years, not to just teach you about like how to do this sort of thing so that parents can be aware of it. So it's kind of like this tightrope that we walk. I think this presentation, I might slip and bob on that tightrope a little bit, but either way, I think it's going to be worthwhile for parents. So let's talk today about a couple of different things. High potency marijuana is the big thing. And really the focus is going to be about teenagers and the effects that high potency marijuana has on their brain development. Also, too, I thought it would be cool for you guys to learn about how kids are using social media to obtain drugs. Also, too, we need to spread the word on vaping and the counterfeiting of these things that we're going to call vape carts. I'm going to teach you all these all this lingo and stuff like that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the mental health aspect of the high potency marijuana and some things that we're getting reports on. So here's a quote from a song. You guys, if you watch the Super Bowl this year, you remember The Weeknd. He says he's never sour. He's just smoking something much louder. And that is basically saying that whatever he's smoking is much stronger than everything else. And, when I was growing up, everybody was just worried about, sex and drugs. And I guess we're still 50 years later, we're still worried about that, but it's worse. It's the kids are inundated with drug information. It's part of the culture. It's part of their music. It's just everywhere these days. So that's something that I'm trying to focus on, is to make sure that teens especially understand that there are going to be consequences if they partake in this stuff. So anyway, here's your information. We had a request. Our director asked if I could just give a little bit of history of marijuana legalization and sort of the path. If you take a look at the map, you remember back in the day, the wild, wild west. Well, that's what we have now in regards to the cannabis landscape. The California, Oregon, Washington, even Arizona, and then of course Colorado leading the way in regards to the legalization, production of cannabis, the amount of money, facilities dedicated to growing marijuana is just mind-boggling. I'll try to give you a little inclination of all of that as we go through the presentation. But in 1931, Illinois passed the first legislation outlawing recreational marijuana. Then Reefer Madness, the movie, came out in 1935. I remember seeing that when I was a kid. I worked for a midnight show I was a movie usher, and we showed that in the midnight show, and I remember all these crazy people showing up. So in 1978, Illinois passed a Cannabis Control Act, but really the legislators couldn't get together and nothing really happened. But in 2013, Governor Quinn signed the first, I guess you would call it like viable medical cannabis law, and that was the compassionate use of medical cannabis. It was a pilot program. It legalized cultivation, sale, and use of marijuana in our state. Dispensaries started selling marijuana to qualified individuals or patients in 2015. And then 2016, marijuana was decriminalized. Anyone caught with 10 grams or less, it was like a $200 fine instead of going to jail. And then J.B. Pritzker in 2019 signed the Illinois Cannabis Regulation Act. And we were the 11th state in the nation to legalize adult use. And then Senate Floor Amendment number 2, which I didn't know this, but we were the first state in history to legalize cannabis use via legislation rather than a public referendum. So the something that came about of that, I guess, is it triggered a expungement of, like, I'm not kidding you, like hundreds of thousands of people that had marijuana on their record. And like anybody that was caught with like 30 grams or less, they just basically expunged that. So the legislation formally went into effect, and then sales began in 2020. So that's the information on legislation and how we got to where we are. So the next thing is, and I just want you to take a look at some of these pictures here, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the reason why I put this slide in. So possession, this is how much you can have in your possession. And this is really sketchy, and it's a gray area too, because if you have a medical card, you're allowed to grow marijuana now. You can grow up to 5 plants. And if you're a decent grower, like, I'm a botanist, so I could figure out how to grow marijuana pretty easily, I'm sure. You can get like a pound of weed off of one plant. And with new genetics and new breeding, you can do that like every 80 days. So having this possession thing and medical marijuana patients and all that, everything is still really just up for grabs. So the marijuana landscape has a lot of loopholes and all these kinds of things in there. But this is what the law says for Illinois. You can have up to 30 grams of flower. And flower is what, us old people would call like a bag of weed. It's the bud that you see people rolling joints up and stuff. It's called flower. Okay. 500 milligrams of THC in a marijuana infused product. That would be things like the gummies and stuff like that, like you've been hearing about. And of course, here's a picture of some ice cream that has cannabis inside of it. And then also too, take a look at that packaging. A lot of these packages obviously are targeting teens, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. You can also have up to 5 grams of marijuana concentrates, and this is what I'm really focusing on, because this is where the potential for medical issues come about because of the potency of these concentrates. So that picture in the middle, rosin, shatter, butter, live wax. There's all these different terms that they use based on whether or not there's a solvent involved in the extraction process. You would not believe the technology that's involved in these kinds of things. You're talking about huge warehouses cultivating marijuana, and then rooms dedicated to extract the THC, which we all know is the active ingredient in marijuana. It's what gets you high. So they're focusing on making that product more concentrated. And that's kind of the reason why I decided to do the presentation. So now that it's legal, what does it cost? And this slide right here is actually something that I wanted to talk about because if you see the pricing of marijuana, it's really expensive, especially in Illinois. Illinois has the highest prices in the entire county. Have you guys paid attention to the news today in the paper? Illinois marijuana sales set to surpass $1 billion in 2021. And then the newspaper article goes on and talks about how the black market is disappearing. And actually, that's really not true. The black market is thriving in Illinois. In fact, they're estimating the black market is bringing in over $1 billion a year in sales. So all of these taxes, take a look at what they're actually taxing. They're taxing the amount of THC in a product. Okay. The higher the THC, the more they're charging. And when people go in to purchase marijuana and they're new, for example, like let's say I go to a dispensary and I go in, you say, what do I recommend? What do you think they recommend? they recommend the products that have the highest amount of THC. You know, it's like, it's crazy what's going on. So in America, bigger, better, always the breeding that's going on, all of these kinds of things that we'll talk about here in just a little bit to increase the potency of marijuana. It's unreal. So I just wanted to give you an idea. $100 worth of flower and edibles, $132 out the door, so over $32 in taxes. And then if you have a medical card, it's only a couple of dollars in taxes. So a lot of people are doing that. And a lot of people, because they have medical cards, are growing marijuana. And that's another presentation altogether. So you wouldn't believe what's going on with that. So here is the breakdown from the Daily Journal. As of September, if you add all of those months together, we're up to about $997 million in recreational and marijuana sales in Illinois. And I know people that actually travel from Illinois to Michigan to get their marijuana. So there's a lot of people in Illinois that actually travel out of state to try to get cheaper products. And then, of course, still people are purchasing marijuana on the black market, especially kids, because kids can't afford that kind of money. So are you guys all good? Anybody have any questions or anything yet? Okay. So this slide here is a picture of a marijuana flower. Okay, if you take a look at it, the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because this lends itself to potency of marijuana. It's kind of how marijuana became so potent. So we've been talking about THC. Again, that's the product that gets you high. In fact, in what they call the resin of the plant, there's like over 400 different chemicals, these different kinds of compounds called terpenes, which are like flavor and aroma profiles. There's CBDA, CBDB, CBDN, THCA, THCV, all these different compounds that are part of this naturally reproducing or produced a compound called resin. And actually all it really is just an evolutionary feature of the plant. It's sticky. And what the female plant does is it produces this resin in and around its flower sites in order to capture the pollen then, which would result in the fertilization of the plant. So the insects come in, they land on the plant, or airborne pollen, or whatever the case may be. And this resin then is, like I say, an evolutionary feature of cannabis, where it's very, very sticky, and it will capture the pollen so that it can um, be fertilized. So the question is what do you think the female's response would be if there was no pollen available? Okay. And the answer really is that it will continue to produce more and more resin. All right. So you see this picture here? These things are called trichomes. This is where all the cannabinoid materials and the THC and all those other compounds that I was talking about. I'm going to back up the slide. You see this frosty stuff here? It's all looks like frost on the plant. Okay. That's this underneath a magnifying glass. These are called trichomes. And basically, what breeders do is they prevent males from pollinating the females, and the females keep pumping out this resin, so much so that the plant becomes basically just a resin producer. That's what they call sensimilla. That's the high potency marijuana. So anybody that's growing marijuana and wants it to be potent doesn't allow males to pollinate it. So that's how that works. Now, over the course of many, many years, like 30, 40 years ago, THC levels in plants were maybe 2 to 4%. So like if you're thinking of returning to the weed of your youth to ease the strain of the pandemic, this weed is nothing like the weed of, back in the days of Woodstock. By 2020, these strains now, you have a couple of different kinds of marijuana strains. One's called cannabis sativa, another one's cannabis indica. They have different effects on the body. Cannabis sativa kind of gives you a heady kind of high. You might play music and clean the house or something like that. And cannabis indica, they call it in the couch. Okay, you get couch lock, you smoke that, and you don't feel like doing anything. You just sitting there and zoning out. So they sort of act a little bit differently. These breeders are producing strains by crossing and continually selectively breeding to make the plant produce more and more THC. And now by 2020, it's common when you go into a dispensary that marijuana is going to have a potency level of about 25 to 30%. This is a picture of confiscated DEA stuff from all the way back in 2019. And you see here that there's just been an increase over the years of the potency of THC. So I think that's enough for that. It kind of gives you a little bit of background on how the potency of the weed now, these days, super strong. Okay. So let's kind of sort of talk now about what kids are doing. Remember this pose? This is called dabbing. You remember that? A little dab will do you. So back in the day, Cam Newton used to do that. And then there was this Atlanta rap group that sort of made that popular. All right. But in marijuana culture, dabbing is referring to this process where you take this super high concentrated resin, you put it in this thing here. This is a modified kind of bowl that you used to see on bongs. Okay. Then you got to use a blowtorch to heat the glass up to melt this stuff. It vaporizes it. And then when they do it, it's like 90% THC. It's unbelievably strong. And this is what's really popular now with kids. So this is why I'm so concerned about marijuana. So I got a little film here. It's about 3 minutes. So if you guys would be cool just to watch this, I think it's really going to kind of give you an idea as to what's really happening out there. Not a lot of people know that this is just going on in our communities. So take a look at this. Go. All right. So what do we got?
So this is 7 grams of lava cake.
Okay.
Legal. You can buy it at the dispensary. What we did. So what you do is you take this little cylinder and you stuff it in there. This press is kind of janky, but it'll do the job. And then you get a little puck.
Oh yeah. Okay. Cool.
And then you stuff this pre-pressed chunk of flour. So then you take this piece of parchment paper.
I was going to say it looks like parchment. How much does that thing cost?
This machine?
Yeah.
So this one's a lower end one. It was about $1,100.
Okay.
Between the 2 plates.
Okay.
Tighten this valve. I got it at 195. Some people go as high as 220, but I think it pushes out extra chlorophyll.
Are you talking about temperature or is it pressure?
This is temperature. Okay. So pressure, there's no gauge on this one. That's why it's one of the cheaper ones. But the crazy thing is like all of that 7 grams, there's probably close to 1,000 milligrams of THC in the trichomes on there. But when you're smoking it like in a bowl, or if you're smoking it in a bong or a joint, a lot of that is wasted. When you concentrate it and then heat up a nail and then vaporize it, you're getting 100% of what you're putting in your system, and it's a lot easier to accurately dose how much you're getting. Problem is, kids and even adults, they think, oh, well, there's no way that tiny little pinprick head of wax can get me that messed up. And in reality, like a little pinprick can be like 20 milligrams of THC to kind of ooze out the side there.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
That means it's coming. So we're at the 1 minute 15 mark right now. Well, you're concentrating it because you're taking the THC out of the plant, but all the THC is stored in the trichome heads. So when you're doing this, you're breaking the trichome heads and squeezing all the THC and cannabinoids and flavor profile out of it, and then the rest of it is just garbage. You can either eat it because there's still leftover rosin in it, but I mean, I usually just throw the chips away.
Okay. Somebody might say, oh, okay, that's 7 grams, but did you really get a lot out of it?
Yeah, you really did, because look at that.
Wow, that's something there. Okay.
Yeah. So what this will do is this will solidify in a couple minutes.
Okay.
And then you just take a clay sculpting tool and scrape it all into a ball.
Okay, so just take a little bit here on a maybe a pencil or something like that. So this is that how much that people are doing?
So look. That right there is enough to get you really high if you're not used to it. That's probably 15 to 20 milligrams.
And now how many scrapes can you get out of that whole page?
I mean, look, it comes up pretty big.
It's forever.
You get about a gram out of every 7 grams doing this because it sticks to itself, and you just keep getting a bigger and bigger ball.
Wow.
And then what happens is
is that hash? Is that hash?
I mean, it's a form of hash. It'll solidify and look like that little like crumbly stuff.
Yeah, like little crumb. It kind of looks like honey almost.
Yeah.
It's got like a honey appearance to it almost.
Well, right now because it's still really warm. You're supposed to wait before you do this, but it doesn't really matter. If it's good quality, it'll stick to itself even when it's wet. So this is pretty high quality.
Okay.
But yeah, in a dispensary, you're looking at $120 a gram plus tax for that. I'm going to let it solidify a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool, man. Thanks for showing me. No problem. Go. All right. So a lot of stuff in there that I wanted to talk about. Now, the machine that he had cost $1,000, and I know many of you are thinking, "Oh, well, it's $1,000. My kid doesn't have that." But kids use hair straighteners to do this. They just take a hair straightener, and so if you see these kinds of like things laying around the bedroom or whatever the case may be, pieces of parchment or whatever the case may be, that's kind of what we're looking at. So that extraction process is one of the reasons why kids are finding it to be so potent that THC now is really, really concentrated. And to make matters worse, I mean, they have pens now that are portable. So you can put the dab material inside the pen here and then just take it on the go. So it's like everything that I'm learning about this stuff is just mind boggling. The potency value of marijuana, the way that they can do it. Look at this. These things are, they're gas masks. They strap these things on their faces and then they inhale that product. This is, by the way, at our local Chicago record store that just opened up on North Street, 5 blocks down from the high school. So, real quick, I can tell our half hour is almost up. I'm sorry. My first time doing this presentation, so I can see it's kind of going to run quick. So I'll just real quick, this is what you see kids using all the time now. These are these vape pens. What I want to talk really quickly about, and I'll just kind of go through, is this part right here. This is called the cartridge. The way that kids call it, they call them carts. Okay, and what happens is this battery is going to heat this oil up and there's a coil inside, and then you can just sort of like heat this material up to the point that it starts to smoke, and then they can inhale whatever this liquid is. And that's the scary part, because you don't know if this is real or fake. I'm not kidding. Kids can't afford the stuff coming out of dispensaries. So you can buy a bag of weed, or like a quarter of weed, on the street for about $40. Most of that marijuana is coming in from Canada, California, and it's really cheap. So you take $40 worth of marijuana, you compress it in a rosin press or in a hair straightener, and then you have that liquid, you put it in the vape pen, or there's other processes to make this liquid inside here. So when you purchase this off the street, off the black market, you have no idea what's going on. In fact, you can go on Amazon and buy blank boxes and blank carts and fill them up with whatever product you want. And we know this is happening all over. They're not just making cheese up in Wisconsin. These two brothers up in Wisconsin were putting out 3,000 to 5,000 cartridges a day. Okay. And this is all black market stuff. And really nobody knows what's going into these things. You might remember a couple of years ago, kids that were vaping were getting sick and some were dying because of that vitamin E acetate that was being added to the cartridges. So this is still a huge problem. And that's the most popular thing that kids are doing now. So on the street, they're picking up these cartridges, and who knows what they're filled up with. So that's something to be really aware of as a parent. Another thing is they're using social media to purchase drugs. Okay. So you can read all this stuff, but the thing that you really want to take a look at is if you're a parent and your kid has Snapchat, you can't monitor Snapchat. It doesn't allow third party monitoring. So parents can't, like find out what their kids are doing on Snapchat. And another thing about Snapchat too is when you post something, it disappears after a couple of seconds. Okay. So it's like anonymous usage basically. And by using these different hashtags and things like that, kids can actually locate through the mapping program in Snapchat where dealers are in their neighborhoods, and then contact them through private messages or whatever the case may be. And then that's how they're getting their drugs. So Snapchat is, and not only Snapchat, but other social media forums. It's been all in the news. I just, want to make sure that parents are aware this is something that they really need to watch out for. And that's kind of what we're doing. So here is some emojis and some hashtags that you could maybe take a look at here. DOC stands for drug of choice. PI is parent investigation. Okay. POS means parent over my shoulder. CD9 is like parents are around. It's like a code 9. So they have all of these little things. The hashtags on the left if you're looking for a certain type of drug or whatever the case may be, you put that in and all of the posts from Snapchat or Instagram or whatever the case may be pop up. And if you see these emojis being used, they typically mean this top line here, okay, that's all the emojis that they use for cocaine. Okay, there's the 8-ball. You might have heard of that before. And this second line, this is marijuana. Look, they're smoking marijuana here. Excuse me. This one here, this is a new, well, it's not new, but it's kind of popular coming up north now. This is what's called lean. It's a drink that they make with codeine, Sprite, and Jolly Ranchers. And then they walk around with their, Polar Pop cups and stuff like that. You have MDMA. This is methamphetamine, heroin, and these are mushrooms. All right. Gas means that it's really strong. Same with rockets. The plug is a emoji that means I have a dealer connection. Okay. And the pie is I have a large amount of drugs and I'm wanting to sell them. So there's like this whole culture that kids are learning about and how to communicate with these dealers online. So I just wanted to let you guys know that. And if you had any further questions or want to know more about it, I'll be glad to send you an entire presentation that I have on these kind of things. Okay. And this is what the screens look like. There's guys that actually like advertise. Okay. So like I say, the kids just, I would hate to be a kid these days. It's got to be so hard. Just trying to sift through all of this stuff and what they're growing up with. It's just crazy. So, just for the sake of time, if anybody's really interested, and I'll be glad to have a conversation with you about like endocannabinoid systems and all that. I wanted to talk a little bit about how THC can affect both mind and body. But let's just talk really quickly about high potency weed and some of the effects that it's having. Have you guys heard of cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome? Because THC affects the endocannabinoid system in two ways. It fits both in lock and key receptors in the brain, and then also too in the digestive tract. So we've often heard that marijuana helps with nausea and vomiting, especially in like parents that or patients that are going through chemotherapy. But what we're finding out is this high potency marijuana and chronic usage of high potency marijuana is actually having an opposite effect on the digestive tract, and people are like vomiting to death, becoming dehydrated and all that kind of stuff. It's rare, but it's becoming more and more common. Emergency rooms are starting to really report that they're seeing an increase in what you would call marijuana overdoses, super high anxieties, psychosis, all these kinds of things. And pretty much teenagers are coming in and reporting these things. So it's the high potency marijuana that we really, really need to focus on and somehow get kids to understand that their brain is developing up to about age 25. And if they start at a young age, they're really setting themselves up for possible addiction. The brain, especially the young brain, it's wired in a way where that reward pathway is really like strong. And grandmothers know this when they give gifts to their, I'm just kidding, but you know what I'm saying? It's like kids crave that type of attention, and drugs can take the place of that. And that's what's really scary. Here's another thing that's scary is the advertisements that we're going to start seeing. This is on 290, I think, on the way to the Morton Arboretum. Look at this. Every day, every day, every day, every day. This is Cresco cannabis. And by the way, Cresco sponsors our local farmers market, and they had a Cresco day just the other weekend where they were planting plants with kids. Because just like tobacco, marijuana, especially high money marijuana people, know that the teenagers of today are the consumers of tomorrow. So priming our kids, and you have to see this kind of stuff coming down. But substance misuse preventionists and other people that have concerns, here is a way that we can combat it. Is this here, weed is legal in 60 miles. You drive to a different state to go get weed. This addiction center put this billboard up right next to this billboard here. Addiction treatment is closer. So I'll leave you with this. There's other things out there too that are dangerous. This is the newest thing on the market. If you see it in stores, especially in like tobacco shops and things like this is called THCO. It's like 3 times as strong. It's legal, by the way, because it actually is derived from hemp. So this stuff right here is crazy. It's actually so strong it produces hallucinatory effects, and you can purchase just over the counter. So again, legislation, it's just all across the board. Nobody really knows what's going on. All these analog products, we remember like Spice and K2 and all the problems that those things brought about in especially teens' lives. But this thing right here is poised to do some damage as well. So I just wanted to say thanks so much. And if you have any questions or you want to talk about other things, feel free to email me, and you